So I thought I'd do a little tutorial on masking. Masking is kind of one of those things like gap filling, where a lot of model builders find it cumbersome and annoying. And the fact of the matter is, that's really true. So I just thought I'd share a few tips on how I do it, just to make it a little less of a pain. My trick is basically, and you can see it kind of in here, these small pieces of paper here, or tape rather, and you just build up the gap slowly from the edges. So wherever you can slide tape into, if there's seams or gaps in there where the pieces maybe didn't fit together perfectly, or they'll be covered by something else, you can kind of slide tape in there a little bit better. Or if not, you just do the best you can to keep it off of the areas that you want it painted, and you just build it up slowly around, and then and close the gap as you go. There's no trick for the size of the pieces of tape. You definitely don't want them too small, because you want enough, meat on the tape to where they can actually grab onto something. Something like this. This is probably 3/4 by 1/2 inch for the areas on this helicopter that I've been doing, and it's pretty much a fine size. Depending on some of the bigger areas, I might cut longer lengths, because there's just no need to build it up too slow. I mean, you don't need to cut little 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch to do this whole windshield area. That would be ridiculous. This is probably the size I use for most of these small gaps here. It's what I'm actually using down here. And we'll zoom in and we'll take a closer look at this area, and I'll show you how I build this up. All right, so now that we can see the gap that we're gonna fill, it's just this little blister or bubble window, whatever you want to call it. And the way I'm doing it is because there's a lot of open spaces inside of the edge here where the door is, and just the framing of the window. There's a lot of space in there where there's no interior walls or anything. It means I can get the tape in there a lot easier, and what I'm doing is I'm putting the sticky side of the tape facing out of the helicopter. So basically, you want to put it in that direction and stick it against the inside up underneath the wall, and then slowly close that gap. And probably by the last piece of tape, you would go opposite and put sticky side facing in to close the last remaining hole. So let's go ahead and go through and we'll do that, and we'll talk about it afterwards. Anybody's wondering where I got this jig from, it's actually from a place called Vertigo-Miniatures, I believe. I'll leave the link in the description, but it's pretty fantastic to be able to find these jigs, especially one that works with a helicopter in 35th scale like this one. This is actually for a plane, technically a plane in 1/32, all the way down to 1/48 is what it says it fits. But it worked out really well for a helicopter, due to the fact that it holds the tail really well, and you can kind of lock the tail in place. I can show that later on real quick, but if anybody's interested, it is a very helpful tool, especially with something like a helicopter that really is just an odd shape to have to deal with. And it comes in all the individual pieces. You got to glue it together, so some assembly required, but it's not really that big of a deal. As you can see, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting the final pieces of tape in there as just the gap gets closed up, and that's pretty typical. That's going to happen. You're going to run out of space. It's especially difficult if, unlike what I'm doing now, you can't get in it from a separate angle. That also makes it very, very tough. Fortunately, I don't have that issue, but it can be a problem. But that's all you do. Just build up the pieces slowly, or from around the edges, and work your way inward. And if you can close up the center, like I did here with pieces from the outside, then you're just killing two birds with one stone at that point. For anybody who wanted to see the jig, this is it. Let me remove this for a second. So this is basically the jig. It's just a big clear piece of acrylic, I guess, and it forms kind of like this cross with these curved sides. It's pretty sturdy, pretty well made. It was cracked when I got it in the mail, but it was coming from way overseas, and who knows what kind of hell it went through. In its shipping. It should have been packaged a little bit better, but some super glue, and it wasn't worth returning for, waiting another 6 weeks for shipping. I would say that's the only downside. It was the shipping time, and obviously it was a little cracked, but it works fine. No complaints other than that. They give you these little foam strips of one-sided sticky foam. You can cut it to size. I have extra, so I'll probably replace it over time if it gets worn out, things like that. You could use the soft side of Velcro if you wanted to. It's nothing fancy, but it is nice that it keeps it on your model on a soft surface, especially after you've painted it. So while it is for a plane, as you can see, you got the wing supports. Everything is adjustable. You've got these little wing nuts here, and you can raise and lower your piece, your work piece, or your model before, or however, to position it however you want it to, depending on what type of wings it has. If it's wings above the fuselage, below the fuselage, in the center. Above would be something like a Catalina. You would have to raise these pieces upward to support it. I've got one sitting over there. Actually, I didn't use this jig for, but definitely would have been helpful to balance it with while painting. So that's it. It sits in pretty nicely. You can see it's got this tail rest here, which works really well. And actually, I have it taken off right now because I was moving it around so much. But there's another wing nut, and you can actually lock it down so that if you wanted to move it without move the whole stand at once, you didn't have to worry about this falling off, and it locks down. You just tighten the wing nuts on both sides. So that's it. I hope you guys learned a little something about masking. I hope those tips helped. Building up slowly with the tape for filling small spaces, using a little bit of paper, keeping it simple, and just going, it seems like more steps because it technically is, but it saves you a bunch of time because you're not sitting there frustrated, struggling with large pieces of tape or anything like that, or large pieces of paper and trying to tuck it in. It just is easier just to build it up slowly. That way you have a plan going in. You can cut the pieces in advance, have them all at the edge of your bench, and you can just go one by one. And it really is faster that way, despite having extra pieces to place. It's just an easier way to build up that gap.